Three, two, one, back in the room. What's happening, people? Welcome to yet another episode of An Idiot's Guide to Happiness. And this week, I am joined by the irrefutable. Why am I doing this silly voice? I don't know. But I quite enjoyed that. But anyway, I am joined by the distinguished gentleman and the force majeure. And the one, the only, the undeniable Vernon Hunt. What's happening?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, Banji.
No problem.
Honoured to be amongst one of your first ever one-to-one interviews that you're doing.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So welcome back, because you were with me for the inaugural recordings of An Idiot's Guide to Happiness,
which made me happy.
Fantastic stuff. It certainly made me happy as well. We had a really interesting conversation, and I would just love to get a bit more in depth in the journey of Vernon Hunt and how you have kind of made your way through this crazy thing called life so far. You know, the ups, the downs, the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful.
Yeah.
And certainly, you know, where your kind of level of happiness in life is at this point, at this stage, and, you know, what we can do or think of to try and help increase that. Or even if you're in a very happy place, any advice that you can give to any listeners. All right. So we're gonna get there. All right. This is nice. This will be warm. You know, this will be friendly. I'm not gonna spring any surprising attacks on you.
I'm glad to hear
I know you work in politics, so, you know, you might be a bit wary sometimes, you know, might be a bit cautious sometimes.
I'm sure it can't be as bad as working in politics.
Well, I should certainly hope this interview would not be as bad as working in politics, definitely. So, anyway, thank you again. So, let's go with so you say you work in politics, so break it down for me. What exactly do you do?
So, I'm a lobbyist, and probably one of those common questions I'm asked actually is, what is a lobbyist? What does he do? So I'm very pleased to get that the way straight away. A lobbyist is basically a translator or a way of communicating between industry and organisations and government. So I don't work for government. A lobbyist doesn't work for government. A lobbyist helps an organisation communicate to government, and that could include writing letters or helping write reports for government attention or telling them the right sort of people to be speaking to. And currently, in my current role, I focus on science and technology. So companies involved in the science and technology space.
Okay. So as someone who's from the streets, I'll talk about me.
So am I. We grew up together.
But no, I mean, like, how did you get into the job like being a lobbyist?
I've always had a real interest in politics and history. Like from the very earliest stage of my life. In fact, one of my earliest memories was actually being home from school ill. I had a stomach ache or something, and I turned on, and they'd just recently started broadcasting Parliament on TV. Like, they've only been filming in Parliament since about 1990. And I thought it was the most amazing thing ever to see MPs sitting on green benches arguing about stuff for a job and trying to find out who was right. And I thought that was amazing. And I thought, I want to be part of the guys on the green benches arguing back and forth. And since then, I was hooked, really. And my dad bought me some good history books, which I just took to like a duck to water. I loved reading the anthology of the 20th century and history and politics. I mean, politics is history happening now.
Interesting.
And in the future, this will be look back at history. So I'll be part of that. So I just built up that interest. I took the right exams, and I went to university, and I studied politics, and I worked in Parliament. Then I worked for...
What did you do in Parliament?
In Parliament, they call it, the nickname for your job is a bag carrier. Really, you work with an MP, and you help them manage their offices. You write speeches. You do research for them on the issues they care about. The guy I was working for, Keith, he had a really big interest in immigration issues, for example, as well. So I did lots
Keith Faz?
Keith Faz.
Okay.
Very, very passionate about immigration issues. And also Europe, but of course that was before Brexit. So I did lots of research, arranging meetings, getting the right people in a room together. And that was how I started out.
So how did you go about getting that job? I'm just asking in
Sure.
case there's anyone who's interested in politics.
It's so hard to get a job working for an MP. And I remember I just finished university. Actually, I'd done a master's as well. So I finished my master's, and I must have smashed out about 80 applications in the month of August to different political jobs, and I didn't get a reply from about 70.
Wow.
And I got maybe nice letters back from 10, interviews of 4, and out of the 70, 80 applications I made, I got one job, and that was the job.
Okay. So, how long did you do that for?
2 years. I think it was 2 years, just over 2 years.
Okay. Now, you said that you've always been interested in politics, from a young age and so on. So, when you got that job, or when you were working in that job, did you feel happy? Like
Yeah.
you would do? Did you feel like you're doing something that you kind of always wanted to do?
I was shocked to the point of happiness. I was happy to the point of shocked because I didn't expect to get what I wanted so quickly. And of course, I didn't really know what I wanted. I knew I wanted to work in politics in a broad sense. But working in Parliament is very badly paid, usually if you're starting out straight from university. And the hours are extremely long and the work is very demanding. So it's very stressful as well to go from university days to that sort of lifestyle. So I was very drained and tired and often stressed, but I was happy because I felt like I was doing what I wanted to do. The problem for me was, what did I do after that? Because you can work for an MP for 10, 20, 30 years, but really after 2 or 3 years you should be looking to move on because there's not many places to go.
Move on or move up?
Both. But sometimes the best way to move up is to move sideways and then to just broaden out your base of skills. And then once you've got the right mix, it's not often a straight path upwards in life. You need to get the right mix of skills at some fairly basic positions. And once you collect that, then you can move up. So that's what was my approach. But I was pretty lost back at the time. I was only 24, 25, and I knew I wanted to stay working in politics. Then lobbying became the obvious answer because that's a good way of getting reasonable money to do the job. And also, a really important point, after 2 years of working for an MP, it really put me off the idea of wanting to be an MP.
Right, because I was going to say, because you kind of said you wanted to be an MP, basically. When you saw, Parliament on TV, you wanted to be there as well.
Yeah, I had a very romantic idea of what being an MP was. Sort of like how people imagine what a doctor is, or just if you imagine being an astronaut at the age of 8, you imagine just getting in the rocket and flying off and having a great time landing on the moon and that. So obviously, the closer you get to the dream, the more you realise what the negatives are as much as the positives. And in this case, it was the fact that being an MP isn't immensely well remunerated for the job. You have a lack of privacy, and I don't know. It's also you don't actually have that much power, which I think a lot of people might find surprising. You think of an MP as being a powerful individual, but really, it's very dependent on the political environment. So if you are a government MP, you have more power than if you're not in a government MP. If you're friends with the Prime Minister, you might have more. But at the end of the day, you have to take orders much like anyone else. Being an MP is just a sort of the bottom entry level ecosystem. They can do great work for their constituents. They can make a real difference in campaigns, and they can really achieve many great things. But it wasn't something that, after seeing the sort of sausage factory, I thought that had me. Then again, I tell you this, Banji, if I had the opportunity to be an MP tomorrow, I wouldn't say no.
Okay.
It's just my career took me a different direction.
Okay, so you did that for a couple of years, and then you moved into lobbying after that.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you get into the lobbying side of things?
Once you work in Parliament for a couple of years, you've got the right skills. I was sort of my mid-20s then. You're quite an attractive prospect to hire. Obviously, not because of the politics, but obviously if you can work for an MP, then you can work for other people of the same sort of demands and stature. And it shows you can manage complicated projects. It shows you can do and deliver. Because I think one of the things about politics is that a lot of people think it's about the ideas. Thank you. The ideas are very important. But being able to deliver an idea, that's what makes you attractive in at least the job market I was working in. It's great to have the ideas, but the ideas usually come from the top, and then they look for people that can deliver the idea. And I think after working for an MP, you have the knowledge of how politics works, but you also have the ability to deliver complicated programs.
Well, seeing as how this podcast is kind of available to an international audience and stuff, do you want to just give a brief explanation of how the kind of British political system works?
Oh my word!
I say brief.
Brief. That is such a brutal question. Oh God.
Is it because you don't really have a clue, even though you've worked in it as well?
No.
I'm just saying from the outside,
Yeah.
From someone who's not involved in politics.
May I flip it around in that case, because it will help me answer the question. If I understand how much you think yourself or your audience might know about or believe the political system works.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for the audience themselves. I don't know exactly what their experience is or what their knowledge base is. For me personally, I feel like the political system is not as I don't feel like it's as effective as it is kind of advertised to be. Personally, I feel like there's way too many sort of hidden agendas and other agendas at play. It'd be wonderful if I truly believe that every MP that goes into Parliament or that enters that job truly wants their constituents to be as happy and healthy and provide services that they require and all that good stuff. But I think while most might enter the job with those kinds of aspirations, I feel like the system is a little bit too complex and a bit too complicated. And what tends to happen is that, like you said, there's a lot of there's a lot of sort of there's a lot of deliberation and debating and that kind of thing that takes place. And I feel like what happens with a lot of MPs, and this is just my outsider's perspective, what happens with a lot of MPs is just they end up finding that it's easier to just go along with whatever agenda is going to, because like you said as well, they don't necessarily, they're not really well paid either. I mean, what the Prime Minister gets, was it officially 40 grand a year or something like that?
I think an MP gets around 68 grand a year now, and the Prime Minister gets, I think it's 140,000 a year.
Okay, so it's gone up since the last time I saw it.
I know sounds like a lot, but if you imagine they could leave Parliament and get employed by a company paying...
this is where I think a lot of the corruption comes into play, which is, companies and certain groups or organizations who want to have policies that benefit them directly. And then there's a lot of, which is why lobbyists tend to get a bad name and a bad rep as well.
You're right, and I appreciate the opportunity to correct record as I see it. So let me start with the fundamentals here. I believe we have a good political system, and it has some inherent flaws. I mean, all political systems do. And in terms of corruption, yes, there is some corruption, but if you look at the research, and I can't quote it off by heart here, generally the British political system comes out to be as one of the least corrupt in the world. Admittedly, I'm not saying there are not problems. We see them reported weekly, and it can be very disheartening, especially for someone like me that works in it. And one thing I'm really, really proud and sort of dedicated to is, ethical representation, ethical lobbying. I mean, just like in any profession, in accountancy or the legal professions or banking, there should be a code, a framework to make sure people's behaviour isn't just legal, it's ethical. And I think that there's lots you can say about that. But of course, good news doesn't sell. And that means in the papers and the TV, you're not going to hear about a story of, such and such lobbyist had a great campaign, it was really ethical, it was really above board, because that's the bare minimum of what you should expect. But you will hear about those that break the code, and that's what gets reported. Winston Churchill said that democracy is the worst system except for the others, and I think that's true. Now, I'm of the left, you could say, of the centre left, so at times it can be very frustrating. We've had a Conservative government for 10 years now.
Yeah.
So a lot of people ask me, how can you be a lobbyist if you're not conservative? But the point of lobbying isn't that you're someone's best mate because you're a conservative, or because you necessarily identify with the philosophy of government.
Or whichever the ruling government is.
Whichever the ruling government is, and of course, if you were conservative during the Labour years, it was a very similar problem. Being a lobbyist is about helping advise and represent people that have very legitimate asks, whatever they may be. Whether it's to ask for extra funding for scientific research, or whether it's to ask for a change in government redistribution for charitable purposes to help certain communities out there as well. There's many good causes, of course, and there's a big difference between at one extreme being a lobbyist for a tobacco company, and I think there should be lobbyists for tobacco companies, by the way, and being a lobbyist for, say, Oxfam. There's a whole range there. Just in the same way that you would hope that in a free society, someone accused of a crime, no matter how guilty you thought they were, that they are entitled to a lawyer, to a defendant, because that's one of the reasons we have a free society, that everyone's entitled to representation. And as long as they obey the rules of the game, that's fine. Now, we had a question about the political system as a whole and how I think it's worked. But before we do that, did you have any sort of comments on what I've just said there?
Well, just a follow-up question is, how genuinely happy do you think people are in your field of work? Just your sense of, your feeling from the various individuals you've interacted with over the years. In the world of politics or the world of lobbying, how genuinely happy do you feel people are?
That's a fantastic question. I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that. I mean,
like I said, just your own personal perspective.
But one thing about lobbying is that you have to represent the message you are trying to communicate in a strong and positive way.
Now, is that regardless of whether you agree with the message or not?
There are exceptions.
Like,
for
are there
example,
times where you've had to kind of lobby for something that you
I haven't. I've been
with?
very fortunate, but also I've chosen cautiously as well. But I do know of other agencies which will say to their staff, an example being a tobacco company would like us to work for them. If any of you have a problem with that, you don't have to be on this particular campaign. So there are examples like that, but there's very few and far between, really. But there is an understanding that there are some campaigns which your personal beliefs are so far in opposition to what you would be paid to communicate that you couldn't be an effective sort of ambassador for that viewpoint.
Okay. So you got into the world of lobbying, and so how long have you been lobbying now?
Every day I'm lobbying. I've been lobbying in one sense or another since, 2008, I guess. But I've been working in government in one sense or another since 2000.
Okay, so you've been in the field of, or around the field of politics for about 20 years.
Yeah, I've seen a lot.
Okay, and lobbying specifically in about 12 years.
That's right.
Okay, so considering when you were younger, you really wanted to get into politics, that was something that would potentially make you happy, that you felt when you were young, you followed the academic route to get into that field. You got into that field, you only did it in terms of actual politics. Mm-hmm. You only worked in that field for a couple of years. You wanted to gain more skills. You were happy but not. Mm-hmm. Is that fair to say? You were happy, but like initially you were happy, but then when you kind of saw all the, not just the bells and whistles of the job, but also
I think my job,
chains and whips, but
working in something I care about is fantastic, and it makes me happy. That's not to say there's sometimes I don't get incredibly fed up with, like what everyone else gets fed up when they see what appears to be politicians getting away with bad behaviour, and you're like, oh, I have to meet this guy in 2 weeks' time. This is not necessarily, but that happens in any industry. Like no matter what industry you work in, you could be having to deal with people who personally you would rather not be dealing with. I don't think that's particularly applies to politics. I'm very lucky to work in, and also, although you could say I stopped being paid to work in politics when I stopped working for an MP. Remember, politics isn't about getting paid to do it. There's an army of volunteers who knock on doors and attend events and political conferences. And they're the real people that make a political platform, political movement. You know, whether it's momentum in the Labour Party, for an example, the Labour Party itself, or the Brexit Party and UKIP at the other end. It's the people who aren't getting paid who are the most involved in politics because they're doing it in their free time.
So do you feel like more people should try and get involved at that sort of ground roots level? Because in terms of any actual change that may take place in society, that it stems from that, from when if politicians see that, I don't know, let's say 20,000 people have a particular cause that they want or particular policy that they want implemented and stuff, and they're kind of, I don't know, whatever, marching to Whitehall and marching to Parliament and marching to Downing Street and stuff.
100%. And I think some of the most depressing things that have happened from my personal point of view, say Brexit, for example, have happened because more people have got involved in a campaign with more energy and more conviction to make Brexit happen than the other side. The other side only woke up when it was too late until the referendum was lost. And not to say there were not many great people working to stop Brexit, but there weren't enough at the end of the day, and they didn't convince enough people, 52 to 48%. That's the way it goes. Most people don't care about politics, and I'm not saying everyone should get involved in the party, but if they do have an issue with society, if they do think it's unfair and it needs to be changed, then there's two options. You get involved, you get stuck in. At the very least, you vote. And at the very, very least, you vote and abstain. Fine, you turn up, you spoil your ballot because you don't like all the parties. That's fine. But if you don't do any of that and you stay at home on election day, then you're left with option B, which really makes me fed up. And option B is to complain and whinge and moan and say it's not fair. And then maybe like lazily do a tweet from their phone and think that's going to change the world. No, I mean, social media is a very powerful force, but at the end of the day, you need boots on the ground. And a few people can have a huge impact on the destiny of society.
So, back to my point about, from my perspective, that politics doesn't really, like, whoever you vote for, or in fact, just voting in general doesn't necessarily do anything. It doesn't actually have the impact that I would like it to have, for example. So do you think I'm kind of talking nonsense when I say that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, look at when Theresa May almost lost election in 2017. She just about held it together because she had the Northern Irish MPs. There were 10 of them, the DUP. And she stayed in power for 3 years. If 6 or 7 seats, instead of being Conservative, were Labour or Lib Dem or any of the other parties, she wouldn't have been Prime Minister anymore. You wouldn't have had the Boris Johnson government. You wouldn't have had Brexit in the same way we were going to have Brexit. You might not have had Brexit at all. And how many votes made a difference in those 7 seats? I don't know. It wouldn't have been many. A few thousand. You might be talking hundreds. And that would have changed the destiny of the nation. So it does matter. The problem with our political system, and this is why I do sort of agree that things need to change, is that in some seats, as you know, we grew up in Westminster. Mm-hmm. They've been Conservative forever, or they've been Labour forever. They're never going to change. Your vote might not make a difference because there are so many Conservative people. Your vote might not make a difference, but it still gets added up and it gets reported how many people as a total. But the point is, maybe a more fair representation system, like they have in Scotland and Wales, like they have in many parts of Europe, would be a better way of making your vote matter.
So give me an explanation of that fairer sort of political system.
So, at one extent, you could have what's called pure proportional representation. So, instead of having 650 little elections, there's 650 MPs. Instead of having 650 little elections, you would have one single list for the whole country. And I'm taking it to extremes here. Mm-hmm. There's many, many forms and modifiers you could apply to this. And if Conservatives got 47% of the vote and Labour got 30%, Lib Dems 15%, then the Conservatives get 47%. Of the MPs, Labour get 30%
kind of
of
direct
proportional representation. Okay. And that would mean you wouldn't have a weird situation that we often have in this country where, in fact, I think we've had it every election except once, where a government has got less than a plurality or 50% of the vote, but has a vast or at least a significant majority in the House of Commons, which doesn't seem fair. If less than half the people vote for a party in this country, Why should they get more than half the seats in the House?
Certainly sounds unfair to me.
Yep. But then you've got problems with proportional representation, which is in countries that have proportional representations, they have lots of small parties. It's endless horse trading. So you might go, I'm going to vote Labour. And you find out Labour's done a deal with the Lib Dems, which means it's abandoned all the policy positions that you voted for, that made you vote Labour, so that the Lib Dems would go into a deal with government and just take power. So you would lose more ability to keep track of what the parties got up to, because they could say, well, actually, we wanted to do that. We wanted to do that so much, but, we wanted to be a government as well, so we had to get rid of that. That's politics, though. That's human nature. That's politics isn't just what happens in the House of Commons. Politics is a small group of friends. It's your workplace. It's every decision that's taken.
Well, I mean, I don't feel like politics. While I do concede that it has helped in certain ways, and I always use the example of the NHS, for example, as my example for, okay, you could say politics works in certain ways where something is implemented that can benefit the majority of people.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, based on my almost 40 years of life experience, and also, being born in a different country and kind of growing up, even though I came to England when I was 8 years old, but having kind of the different political experience, and then coming to the West and having this political experience over here, I just feel like politics is kind of overhyped as to how much positive impact it can have on individuals' lives, personally.
And I can appreciate that on the basis that if you're a person that's never got a break from the government ever, and you grow up in a bad background, I'm not saying you have Banji, but if you're a person that's never had a break, has a really bad life, and you're like, what's government ever done for me? It's pointless. Every election I vote for the best party, and they never win, and I never get any benefit, so fine. But I disagree with that on the basis that one of my favourite Obama quotes, it's not his, he didn't come up with it, but he made it famous, was, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. So that's like having a very flat line, which slowly, if you look at it over the very long term, bends. And I agree with that, because what were we doing like 2,000 years ago? We were crucifying people. What we were doing a few hundred years ago, well, we were persecuting people for the wrong religion, and you could go on, and we weren't allowing women to vote. Slavery existed. The reason all these things have been got rid of is politics. It's pressure, and it's not to say decisions at the top, by the way. I'm not saying like some prime minister woke up one day and said, let's give women the vote. I mean, women couldn't even vote to bring about women to have the vote, of course, but they had a fantastic campaign without having any sort of direct political voice in the system, and they got themselves a vote, which is an amazing thing. And that's something that is incredibly new, but you have to see that grand historical sweep. And of course, history does go backwards as well. Like sometimes you have setbacks. I mean, some people say Brexit was a setback. Some people say election of Donald Trump was a huge setback. Taking us back to, if not the 1950s, the 1850s in terms
or possibly the Stone Age.
Possibly the Stone Age.
Bit of a caveman.
Exactly. But I think you have to believe in it, because more than anything else, I mean, I believe it does work. But if you don't believe in it, you got no plan B. Unless you want to suddenly get communist or totalitarian of one nature or another, and you put all faith in one man or woman at the top of the game making all the decisions on their own.
Okay, well, we're going to take a brief pause just because I need to change the recording file, because this one is now nice and full. So hang tight, people, for part 2 of this beautiful conversation with Vernon Hunt.
It's been a pleasure.